Before we get started, I just wanted to warn you that there are a few places throughout the recording where our audio recording equipment seems to have skipped slightly. We're not losing big chunks, it's just a few words here and there. It doesn't really change the overall effect of what we're talking about, but there might be moments where you notice it seems like we skipped a couple words or something. We're sorry. We're hoping to fix it for the next episode. I think it's Katie's computer being dumb. On to the episode. This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian. I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
Look, some of us are lazy, alright?
If by lazy you mean wrong.
Prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide whether the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because guess what? This film is lit. A coming-of-age tale about friendship, death, and the importance of knowing train schedules. It's Stand By Me, and this film is lit.
I want to retitle this The Importance of Knowing Train Schedules.
It reminds me, I know, I thought of that. I was pretty happy with that. But it reminded me of the title of Birdman is Birdman or the Importance of Being, or I don't know. It's got some weird title like that. But yeah, it is a key element for both them and the boy who gets hit by a train. So welcome back to the 21st. Shit.
I couldn't tell you.
To this film is lit. Today's episode, we're talking about the 1979 film Stand By Me, based on the 72 novella, The Body, by Stephen King. I believe it's 72, 71, in that range. Early 70 novella.
I think you're wrong.
Oh.
It's 1982.
82, so then it would be 89? No.
The movie was like 86, I think.
86,
yeah.
Boy, I don't know. Oh, I'm thinking of Captain America in 1979. That's a whole different show. Had that stuck in my head. Anyways, so we're going to jump right into our first segment. Wait, actually, I forgot how all of this works. I feel like it's been a while. We were doing so many in a row, and now I remember. We're going to do the part where I do a little, for people who haven't seen the film, it's a little synopsis.
He must have started walking on the train tracks and just followed them the whole way.
Yeah, right. And then after dark, a train must have come along and all smacko.
Yeah. Hey, you guys. I bet you anything that if we find him, we'll get our pictures in the paper.
Yeah, we can even be on TV. Sure, we'll be heroes.
Yeah!
4 rambunctious boys set out on a trek to find the body of another boy suspected to have been hit by a train. The journey offers challenges and setbacks, trains, bullies, and leeches. It's a simple tale of friendship, growing up, and coming to terms with what all of it means. That's pretty much it without getting into spoilers. I think that's a fairly good brief. Yeah. I mean, it's a very simple tale.
It is.
And there's not much to set up in terms of the world or, backstory. It's just 4 boys in Castle Rock, Oregon, I believe it is. And they hear about that a kid got hit by a train, and that these people, one of the 4 boys' older brothers knows where it is, and they want to go find it. All for their own reasons.
Yay, seeing a dead body.
Yeah, all for their own reasons, and then they go set out on their journey to find it. That's it.
It's pretty simple.
That's it. Let's get into our first segment. Guess who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay, we have 4 entries for Guess Who today. He was sweating buckets, and his hair, which he usually kept combed in a perfect imitation of his rock and roll idol, Bobby Rydell, was plastered to his bullet head in chunks and strings.
Oof. Okay. The only one who really has a rock and roll haircut, I'm assuming it's one of the main four boys. It could also be like one of their older brothers, which I don't know any of their names. I know Kiefer Sutherland is Ace.
Yeah.
I guess it could be him. But my guess would be Corey Feldman's character, who I can't remember. I remember all their names. Gordy, Vern, Chris, and then Corey Feldman's character.
Teddy?
Yeah.
Well, it's not Teddy.
Okay.
It's Vern.
Oh, yeah. He just has like a crop, like a buzz cut.
Yeah, like a buzz cut. He was sweating buckets. Oh, wait.
That's the first. I was like,
started
they're all
reading that
sweating
one again.
buckets.
Yeah. And here he came, dressed in sweat-stained fatigues and a New York Giants baseball cap, his mouth drawn down in distracted anger. His complexion darkened to a scary plum color. Even his scalp was purple under the short hedgehog bristles of his flat-top haircut.
Okay, well then this would be Teddy. Based on the fatigues. Unless they swapped that around, which they could have, but Teddy wears well, he doesn't wear actual fatigues, but he wears military color like style clothing, and it makes sense because his dad was in World War II and he's like obsessed with the military. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go with Teddy.
It's not Teddy.
Holy fuck! One of these has to be Teddy.
It's Milo Pressman, the garbage dump guy.
Oh, yeah, he's not wearing fatigues. He's just wearing like a mechanic's jumpsuit.
Yeah.
In the movie. Okay. All right.
The teachers didn't approve of this duck-tailed, leather-jacketed, engineer-booted apparition.
Okay, the only person I think we see in the film, which apparently doesn't mean anything, wear a leather jacket, I believe is Ace. It could be Chris, but he never wears a leather jacket, and but he kind of has more of a greaser look to him, so it could be him. I'm gonna go with Ace.
It actually is Chris.
Okay, I could see it being Chris too.
Yeah. To be fair, that description happens in like kind of a flash forward to like a little bit into the school year.
Okay.
So maybe he's just smart and doesn't wear a leather jacket in the summer.
In the middle of the summer, yeah. Fair point. Yeah, but I think we see Ace wearing one at some point, like when they're like sitting in the junkyard working on that car or whatever. Or not the junkyard, but when they're giving each other like cut scars or whatever. Yeah. I think he's wearing a leather jacket in that scene. So, is there any more? Did I go over
one
four?
more?
All right, I got one chance to get one.
He was close to being 13, like the rest of us, but the thick glasses and hearing aid he wore sometimes made him look like an old man. Back in those days, when it was cool to get your hair cut so that your ears stuck out like a couple of jug handles, Rock's first Beatle haircut. 4 years before anyone in America had ever heard of the Beatles. He kept his ears covered because they looked like 2 lumps of warm wax.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back to the well and bank on this being Teddy. With the glasses and the hearing aid, assuming they do anything with the story with him having his ear messed up from his dad. Teddy.
It is Teddy.
Well, if I just guessed it every time, except for once, so... I feel like it had to be right eventually.
I didn't read that one first on purpose.
Tricked me. Especially because the fatigues on the other one, it's not fair. All right, fine. 1 for 4. Whatever.
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So I'm hitting a lot of the big key moments that people remember from the movie. That I do. Sometimes, but... All right, first one. I guess we can start in the film. Or relevant in the story. I mean, not in the film. Obviously, he's in the film. Gordy's older brother, Denny, is he a character that of any importance in the book?
Yes.
Okay. Following on, does he give Gordy a Yankees hat?
No.
Okay. And I guess my question was, kind of following from that, is Denny's role, I guess you can kind of explain how he shows up in the thing, because to me, the scenes with him, the flashbacks cut in with Gordy's character, and we discussed in the prequel episode, so I already know this wasn't in the book, that for the film, they shifted the point of view or the main character to Gordy, sort of. At least that's how they described it.
He's the narrator.
Is he?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, but it's interesting because when we were talking about it, and I read that somewhere I read that Rob Reiner said he wanted to make the focus Gordy's character, maybe the focus, not.
I think I can clear that up, but it's something that I want to talk about in another segment.
Okay, so we'll get back into the Gordy being the focus versus whatever, because he is. I think I knew he was the narrator in the book, but
yeah.
Rob Reiner said he wanted to make him the focus. So my question is, do we have the similar sort of flashback scenes punctuated throughout the story that we do in the film, where we see Gordy interacting with John Cusack playing Denny, his older brother, after Denny has died, and he's remembering sort of their relationship?
Not really.
Okay.
He does touch on some memories here and there, but it's kind of a different relationship in the book, which is something that I want to talk about in another segment.
That was one of the things I had a feeling was that their relationship was portrayed very different.
Yeah.
Potentially very different. Because in the movie, and I'll just talk about how it's in the movie, and you can, when we get to the later segments, you can kind of discuss what you like better about the movie or the book, whichever. Is that he's a very supportive, loving brother who's really just supportive of Gordy and his writing and everything he does. And their parents are obsessed with, well, specifically his dad is obsessed with Denny because he's the star football player and the older one, and the firstborn son and all that sort of stuff. And but Denny is always trying to
kind of shift the focus
a little more equally and give Gordy more of a spotlight. And it's really sweet in the film. And it's very endearing, and it felt a little like maybe this was kind of a movie thing played up to add an interesting dynamic between Gordy and his brother, and then to add him taking the hat wasn't a thing in the book. Having their relationship be a lot more endearing and positive, or maybe not more, but just have their relationship being very positive, super close brotherly relationship adds a lot more sort of stakes. Not even stakes, but adds more emotional impact to him. His hat being taken that his brother, his now passed away brother, had given him. So, all right. And since that doesn't happen in the book, they might not have to do their relationship the same way that they did in the film. Okay, so, and my main question there was, does he give him the hat? And the answer is no. So, all right, next one. Early in the film, not early, I don't know, fairly early in the film, after they set out, Teddy, at one point, a train is coming, and he stands on the tracks and just stares down a train. He's like, I'm going to dodge the train. And then they have to yank him off the train, or Chris yanks him off the train tracks. Does Teddy do that in the book?
Yes, that scene does happen in the book.
Okay, and it is Teddy?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because that I thought it was interesting. It's an interesting character moment for Teddy early to kind of establish his...
He's he's definitely got a temper. He's kind of a loose cannon.
Yeah. And he's very disaffected by, maybe that's the right word. Is that the right, maybe I'm using the wrong word there. Obviously by his relationship with his father.
Yes.
And his home life and the fact that he really looks up to his father or pretends to, because he was in the military and that sort of thing. And it's kind of his whole identity in the film.
Right. But
at the same time, his father was very abusive to him while he was living there. And in the film, he has since been, it sounds like, moved to a home or some sort of something. Like I think the guy implies it's like a mental institution. I don't know if that's the case or not, but
yes,
yeah.
There's a little bit more to Teddy's backstory in the book. Like the thing about his dad pressing his ears against the stove is the same.
Yeah,
but when he does it, I think it's a neighbor who calls the ambulance, calls the police, I think. His dad starts talking like he's still in the war. So it's a very clear, like, kind of PTSD type thing. Yeah. And he ends up going to, like, a veterans psychiatric care facility. Yeah.
And I think it's very clear in the movie that the way Teddy deals with the trauma of that abuse is to idealize his father in a way and to almost completely erase sort of the person he was when he came back from the war or whatever, or his experience with him post the war. I assume, I don't know if he was born after the war. I guess he probably was, because this is take place but I guess his later life, whatever. He's very clearly idealizes sort of the heroic version of his father.
Yes.
And does his best to ignore. And anytime anybody reminds him of the fact that his father actually did some terrible things to him and that sort of thing, he gets very upset about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the train dodged in the film, and again, that sets up his sort of loose cannon.
Maybe some undealt with, like mental health issues.
Yeah, mental health issues. Yeah, that he has not, and which
at
that time, in that time period, it's most people didn't have a good way to deal with, or a lot of people didn't have a good way to deal with.
It's unaddressed trauma.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so the train dodge is in the film, which, by the way, that scene in the movie is, I forgot about it, and it was one of the most brilliantly handled scenes. I love that the way they chose to film it, that when Chris finally pulls him off the train tracks, and then he pulls him, and the shot is up at the train, and they're just yelling at each other, but you can't hear them over the train. Mm-hmm. Just that the cacophony of noise of the train with them screaming at each other, I thought was really successful.
Are we watching them through the train at that point?
There's some of it where I think it goes back and forth. Okay. There's a couple shots where it's through the train, and then there's a couple where it's, because I know one explicitly, there's one where it's up, and you see, like, Chris is in the foreground. It's like a medium shot of Chris with the train behind him, but there is a couple shots through the, like, as the train's going by.
Yeah.
And it's just super loud, and, like, that sort of building of the tension and then release into this cacophony of, like, anger and
train noise,
which I just thought was really well done. The comb. Does Vern bring a comb so that when they find the body and get on the news, their hair can look good?
No, that's just the movie.
Dang.
I like that as a small addition, though.
Yeah, it's a good little moment for Vern to kind of play up his sort of innocence and sort of just, well, yeah, we're going to be on the news. We got to make sure we look good after we find this dead kid.
Yeah, and then that loss of innocence when he loses the comb.
That was my other note, and now it's very... It's a little...
On the nose, but it is on the bridge later in the film, with the famous scene where the train comes while they're on the bridge, and he trips and falls, and while he's crawling, he and I mean, there's even some there's even more symbolism in the fact that he's crawling at first, being even more representative of youth, innocence, and then he loses the comb in that moment, and then he stands up and starts running to escape the train, death, oncoming, life, whatever. So yeah, I thought the comb was a fun, and it's funny. I don't know how common, to play even more on the idea of it representing sort of childhood innocence or innocence in general, naivete. I don't know how common white combs were versus black combs, but black combs are like pretty standard. Yeah, and he happened to have a white one. Yeah, which, I mean, is sort of your basic color spectrum of innocence versus purity versus. Yeah. And now I'm sure it wasn't super uncommon, because it was probably like a bone or like a, you know what I mean, some sort of like, or not, something like made out of like bone or ivory or who knows, something like that. But still, the classic comb is a black, either plastic or whatever wooden comb. So. Okay, comb not in the movie. I mean, not in the book. Definitely in the movie. Speaking of the bridge train scene, is that in the book? The big climactic of the second act-ish. The scene that everyone remembers.
Yeah, the scene that everyone remembers where they're on the bridge and then the train comes and then they gotta run and barely escaping, crushed by the train.
That is in the book.
Okay. How does it play out?
Similarly, I don't think that Vern was crawling.
He wasn't crawling?
Yeah, I don't believe that was in the book.
Yeah.
But it plays out pretty similarly, and actually it was pretty cool to read. Yeah. Because, action scenes aren't all that easy to write.
And they can be tough, for sure, yeah.
And it was kind of cool to read it, like, he sets it up where you can, like, kind of feel the panic that Gordy's feeling in this moment when he bends down to touch the rail and it's like humming and he realizes that there's a train coming down the tracks.
So Katie has found an excerpt from the train bridge scene in the book, and she's going to read it now.
And worst, somehow most horrible of all, I couldn't hear the train yet, Could not know if it was rushing at me from ahead or behind, or how close it was. It was invisible. It was unannounced, except for that shaking rail. There was only that to advertise its imminent arrival. An image of Ray Brower, dreadfully mangled and thrown into a ditch somewhere like a ripped open laundry bag, reeled before my eyes. We would join him, or at least Vern and I would, or at least I would. We had invited ourselves to our own funerals. The last thought broke the paralysis, and I shot to my feet. I probably would have looked like a jack-in-the-box to anyone watching, but I felt to myself like a boy in an underwater slow motion, shooting up not through 5 feet of air, but rather up through 500 feet of water, moving slowly, moving with a dreadful languidness as the water parted grudgingly. But at last I did break the surface. I screamed, "Train!" The last of the paralysis fell from me, and I began to run. Vern's head jerked back over his shoulder. The surprise that distorted his face was almost comically exaggerated, written as large as the letters in a Dick and Jane primer. He saw me break into my clumsy, shambling run, dancing from one horribly high cross-tie to the next, and knew I wasn't joking.
Cool. Yeah. No, it was good. And it was funny. It plays out the yelling of train. It's Gordy that yells train when he realizes. Although I don't know if he feels it from the thing. I think he hears it in the film.
Yeah, you actually see like the smoke in the film.
Yeah, he sees the smoke because he does feel the rail before they start crossing the bridge.
Yeah.
But he doesn't feel anything, so then they go, and I think he either hears it or sees the smoke because he's not crawling or anything. He's just walking, so I don't know if he... Or I guess you could feel it through your feet, potentially. Especially on the bridge, I bet you could.
Yeah, I bet you could.
All right, cool. No, that was neat. All right, so the bridge train in the bridge train scene is in the film. But, God, it's obviously in the film. All right, next one. The pie-eating story / scene. Mm-hmm. Is that in the book?
Yes, it is.
Is it described? Well, I guess we would probably just hear Gordy telling it, I would imagine. Or is it...
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. So they're sitting around the campfire, and they start talking about this story, and then in the middle of the chapter is this segue into one of adult Gordy's short stories that was published in a journal, and it is the pie-eating story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then we're basically reading...
Right, we're reading the short story version of it, and then at the end of it, we come back to the boys around the campfire.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's an interesting structure.
Yeah, that's different.
That I want to talk about a little bit later.
Okay, that is an interesting way to do that. That's very strange.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that's because I figured. I don't know. I mean, I figured it was probably. Seemed like a strange thing to make up. I figured he told a story of some sort because obviously with Gordy being a writer or becoming a writer and his prowess for storytelling that he probably did. I was just wondering if maybe they tried to come up with something more visually interesting and a moment of levity in the middle of the film, or if that's what if it played out the same. And it was in fact the pie eating and puking. So there you go. Last one in the film. We find out that later on in life, Chris, whatever his last name is, Gordy's best friend, was stabbed to death in a restaurant, trying to stop an interaction or an altercation between two guys in front of him in line. Ended up getting stabbed in the neck and dies. One, I guess, does he die?
Yes.
I thought so, in the book. Second, is he stabbed in what are the circumstances of his death? Is he stabbed?
It's the same.
Is it the same?
Yeah.
Okay. And now, because the reason I thought it was interesting, I think there's an interesting irony or whatever you want to call it to in the final climax of the movie. There's a standoff between Ace and Chris and Gordy. Ace pulls out a knife and threatens to kill Chris, basically. And ultimately, Gordy pulls out the gun and gets them to leave. And we'll discuss if that plays out the same at some point, probably.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was interesting that in that moment, he threatens to stab him and kill him, and ultimately 10 years later or whatever, that he does end up getting stabbed and killed.
He does in fact get knifed.
Yes.
Like the irony there is that he does get out of the kind of shitty...
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean. Yes,
prescribed situation that he's in, but he ends up getting knifed in a fight
still
anyway.
Dies by the knife. Yeah, that was where I was going with the irony of it, is that, yes, he does escape. He does escape his upbringing and sort of the small town and his station. He escapes his station in life. But ultimately still ends up getting stabbed and killed, which everybody assumed is what was going to happen to him when he was a kid, is what happens to him. But he became a successful lawyer, and he did it, and he got stabbed in a way where he was trying to be a good person and help and that sort of thing and break up a fight. So I thought there's sort of a grand irony or sadness to that, whatever you want to call it. Maybe irony is not the right word, I don't know. But anyways, so that is in the book. Cool, that's all I had for Was That in the Book. So we're going to move on to Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
All right, so there's one thing that I didn't understand. Did Lardass have to pay to get into the contest?
Oh my god. Honestly, I don't think that joke was in the book.
Oh, wasn't
it?
I didn't have anything for this segment, but when they were talking about when that moment happened in the film where he's like, "This is one thing I don't get. Did Lardass have to pay to get into the competition?" I was like, "Perfect." Because, it's a very simple story. There wasn't anything I was confused about or wasn't sure or needed more background on, really. So, I just had one stupid joke for that part. So, now we're going to move on to Better in the Book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
Okay, I have a couple things here. I don't have a ton for either section.
Okay.
Because it's a pretty accurate, faithful adaptation. It's almost beat for beat.
Really?
With a few,
minor changes.
Minor changes, and there are a couple things that are changed to make it more movie-like, which I'll get into a little bit later.
Which, and just to point out now, this is, reading earlier, I believe it's one of Stephen King's favorite adaptations of his work, and I believe I've heard it. He said it was the first adaptation of his work that he liked.
Interesting.
I think is what I read. In the 25th anniversary Blu-ray set, Stephen King noted that he considered the film to be the first successful translation to film of any of his works.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. Better in the book.
All right, so in the movie, right when they start out on their journey, the movie has them cross a really short bridge. It's a short, teeny little trestle.
In the book, you said?
No, in the movie. Yeah, before anything.
Oh, yeah. Right when they leave town, right on the edge of town.
Right on the edge of town, they cross a short little bridge, and I get the symbolism there.
Yeah.
I understand the symbolism fully. But I had this brief moment of sheer disappointment because I thought the movie was skipping straight to the main bridge scene.
Oh, really?
Because that short bridge, that doesn't happen in the book. And I was I saw him start to cross it and I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait just a galldarn second here.
1, way too early. 2, that bridge is way too short.
That bridge is not nearly frightening enough.
Yeah.
And I mean, it ended up not being that, but
right.
As somebody who read the book, I just had this moment of, hang on. So.
All right. I don't know if that's necessarily better in the book as it is when you've read the book, you're a little wait a second. That doesn't necessarily mean it's better in the book. Because, like you said, for the symbolism, for the moment in the film as they leave town, and then, as soon as I take this step across this line of hedges, this will be the furthest from town or furthest from home I've ever been, that sort of thing. But
another thing I liked better in the book, which we already talked about, was that we learn a little bit more of Teddy's backstory. I think that was useful.
Is
helpful.
it specific, like anything specific that's really interesting that we learn, or is it?
Well, the thing about, like, it's more about what has happened with his dad.
Right.
Which we already discussed.
And sort of maybe, because I think you get the vibe in the movie of sort of PTSD and that sort of thing, but it's just a little more explicitly.
Right.
And a little more background on
Yeah, I think that there's more of an explanation in the book.
Okay.
And it seems a little more solid to me.
Yeah.
In the movie, Gordy has a nightmare about Denny's funeral. He does not have the same nightmare in the book, but he does talk about a recurring nightmare that he has, which I think sounds creepier.
Okay.
So in the book, one of the things with Denny is that his bedroom is basically like an untouched shrine. Which they touch on it.
Yeah, they allude to it.
They allude to it,
but they don't go in there.
Right, it's not an explicit thing. Like, so Gordy gets really creeped out when he has to go in there because it looks exactly like he's still alive. So he has this recurring nightmare that he has to go in the room and, like, Denny's corpse is in there.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, sits up and looks at him.
That is creepier than... Because in the movie it's just that he's at the funeral and his dad turns and is like, "You I wish it was you, or it should have been you," or something like that. So yeah, no, that would be creepier, and it would also tie into some of the other, potentially a little more to some of the. That's interesting because I think it would. One of the big themes in the movie, and maybe we'll get to it, but. One of the reasons the focus is on Gordy, and like I said, you might have more about this, is that Gordy's feels guilty about he didn't see his brother's body or something.
I think was it that he didn't cry?
Yeah, he didn't cry. Sorry, that's it. That's it. We'll see it. In the movie, he didn't cry at his brother's funeral, and he feels really guilty about it. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons he's so bound and determined to find the body, as it were, is he feels like it will be closure for him,
right,
to some extent, to see the body, and it will help him sort of come to terms with that with that part of his life,
right, that unresolved
guilt is kind of his thinking, at least,
yeah.
And so I think the idea of using the nightmare where his brother is, a corpse in his room, almost sort of could add to that angle of the guilt of because his brother who he cared so much about and all that sort of stuff, whereas having the recurring nightmare about his dad being like, "I wish you were dead," doesn't necessarily tie into the same theme of guilt. I guess it does. It definitely ties into guilt. It's just to me it's a different guilt.
It's a different communication or manifestation of that guilt.
Right, that's fair. All right. What else is better in the book?
All right, I have one more thing. So when they're camping out at night in the woods, and in the movie they hear howling pack of coyotes. And they're like,
and then they take turns with the gun,
they take turns keeping watch. And they're like, "Oh, what could it be? Is it a ghost? It might be a ghost." And I was like, "Clearly, it's a pack of coyotes."
Yeah.
I don't.
You kids grew up in the country, in a little tiny town, running around out in the. What coyotes?
That's very clearly coyotes. I mean, coyotes would also be terrifying if you were camping in the middle of the woods, because coyotes will tear you up. But
maybe I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like coyotes
they would tear up a bunch of them.
Maybe
they're pack hunters.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know enough about coyotes. I don't know if people get eaten by coyotes and that.
Well, kids do.
I will take your word for it. Not to be the actually guy, but there have only been 2 recorded incidents of coyotes killing humans in the United States or Canada ever. You're more likely to die from a champagne cork or a golf ball than you are to be bitten by a coyote. So there's that. That being said, coyotes can still be quite scary. Anyway, sorry.
So in the book, it's not a pack of howling coyotes. It is a screaming panther.
Oh.
Or mountain lion.
Yeah, mountain lion. They do make weird noises.
If you have ever heard that, that's way creepier than howling coyotes.
Yeah, and it's super rare. Like, it's way more rare to hear than I feel like.
Because it sounds like somebody screaming.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've never heard it in real life, but I've heard clips of
like
it or whatever.
A human person. You should put a
I'll
clip.
if I can find
in.
one, I'll put one in right here.
Maybe put one in of Howling Coyotes too, so people can compare which one's creepier. Because in my humble opinion, Screaming Mountain Lion way scarier.
All right, so here are the Howling Coyotes. Wow, that was so not scary. And now here is the Screaming Mountain Lion. Wow, that was terrifying.
Utterly terrifying.
All right. Yeah, no, I agree though. That would be because it's way creepier. And again, but I guess part of the reason they would probably use coyotes is something people watching the movie might not know what a Screaming Mountain Lion is and might be like, what the fuck was that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas coyotes, people know what it is and they're like, it's coyotes. They're kids. They're, their minds are going crazy. It makes sense. Whereas if it's a Screaming Mountain Lion, people who didn't know what that was might be like, wait, what were they hearing? You know what I mean?
Okay, but I will posit that you could easily take care of that the same way they did in the book by having one of the boys be like, it's a mountain lion.
Right. Fair enough.
They sound like a screaming woman.
Yeah.
Which is that's like the popular lore. If you ever read Little House on the Prairie books, a panther screams like a woman.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I agree though. Then that would be better. But that's it for better in the book.
Yes.
So let's move along to better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
All right, so I've got a couple things here. The movie starts out with adult Gordy looking at the newspaper announcement of Chris having been knifed in the restaurant.
Yeah, the story about it.
Yes, the story about it.
Yeah.
So in the book, we don't find that out until the very end, that was how he met his demise. Mm-hmm. And I think that it was a good decision to give this a little bit of a stronger framing story.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely adds that impending, the impending, what's the word for it? There's got to be an actual word term for this, for when you know the fate of a character.
It's dramatic irony.
Dramatic irony? Okay,
yeah.
Well, that's what I was using earlier. That's not the way I meant it. I meant it differently. But, so yeah, the dramatic irony, that sort of, when you know...
Right, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters don't.
That is true. I did know that. I remember that now. So yes, the dramatic irony of us knowing that, yeah.
Right, and the kids don't know.
Yeah,
and it makes that kind of like reminiscing aspect a little bit stronger than it might have been otherwise, because there are some voiceovers from adult Gordy, but correct me if I'm wrong, like it kind of peters out throughout the movie. Like there are fewer and fewer like voiceovers from him as it goes on.
I think you're correct, but they're definitely throughout. It might be less as we go. That wasn't something I was paying attention to. Like, you know, how regularly we got those, but I think that seems correct, that once we get in more of the action and more of the sort of drama later in the film, we get less of that, but it still happens now.
No, it does still happen. I'm just saying, I think that if you're going to make the decision to have fewer and fewer of the voiceovers, then it's a good idea to make that framing device stronger by having a scene at the beginning.
Yes. I would agree with that.
So let's talk Denny and Gordy's relationship.
Okay, yes, this is right. We put a pin in this from earlier.
Right, we put a pin in this. The Yankees cap does become kind of an interesting visual symbol of their relationship. So in the film, they have a good relationship. Mm-hmm. Very brotherly. Denny, like, looks out for him and everything. In the book, they don't have a bad relationship. It's kind of almost non-existent.
That was what I figured,
like,
kind of.
Yeah, there's a huge age gap between them in the book, and then there's a pretty big age gap in the movie. I don't think they ever say how much of an age gap.
My guess would be So he died as a senior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was only a few months before the story we're watching.
Right.
And Gordy is going to middle school
he's
at the
like
end
12.
of this summer.
Yeah.
So 5-6 years, potentially at most, I would say. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like senior of high
6
school
or
to
7.
maybe, yeah, depending on
somewhere in the 5
in
to
that
7
range.
range.
Yeah.
So in the book it's like 11 years.
Okay.
So it's a good long chunk of time, and he talks about how when he was like a little kid, he had kind of this hero worship for Denny, and Denny would like occasionally take him places, and he would get to hang out with the big kids. But that happened like less and less frequently as they both got older. So by the time Denny died, he was almost, they were almost strangers. Like they didn't really know each other anymore. Yeah. So there's not the same kind of emotional upheaval that we get in the movie. And I liked that better for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
I think it's a better emotional center
for the film, and it results in a better through line with the climax, because in the climax in the book it's Chris who has the gun. Okay.
And that makes sense in the book for a couple different reasons.
Yeah. Well, one, it's Chris's gun.
It's Chris's gun.
Well, I mean, it's his dad's, but it's...
Yeah, and Chris has, like, since we're missing that emotional thing with Denny and Gordy, sort of.
Yeah.
Chris has more of the emotional...
Yeah.
Character growth, kind of.
And he does in the film as well.
Yeah.
He's definitely... And he's also... their relationship is the central...
Yes.
On-screen, their relationship and their back and forth is the central main part of the movie, other than resolving sort of the guilt and that sort of stuff with Gordy and Denny. But, so, yeah, I can see what you're saying, that him using the gun or having the gun would make sense when we don't have the same... Because in the movie, Gordy doing it makes sense because, one, with the story we have, with the connection between him and Denny and his brother, or his older brother Denny, and the hat, and them having taken the hat from him, and him being sort of the eternally put upon sort of
little brother,
having that moment of
standing up for himself
is a very satisfying climax.
Yeah, I think it's more satisfying, it's more salient, and like I said, I think it's a better emotional through line.
Yeah.
In the book, it's a little more focused on Chris and like his emotional through line,
right?
Which is also important.
Yeah.
But I think the way the movie does it makes a little more sense, especially considering that Gordy's the narrator.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is that Chris, we never got the vibe that it never seemed like Chris wouldn't stand up in the film, that Chris wouldn't stand up for himself to other people that he thought were equal to him or that were on the same rung of society as him. His problem came with people who were on higher levels of society or who had authority over him. That was his bar that he had to overcome. In the film, he had he had trouble sort of speaking up and standing up to adults and people that like looked down on him, or people that assumed he was just as bad, or just as because he came from a family where his brother and his father were both deadbeats and criminals and that sort of thing. So he had trouble sort of standing up to in the face of that narrative from everybody in the film, but he didn't seem to have trouble standing up to. It never seemed to me like he would have trouble standing up to Ace's gang. And he doesn't in the film. Like, he does stand up to him until ultimately, a guy pulls out a knife and there's like 8 of them there.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense to transfer that to Gordy, because that is growth for Gordy. Whereas I don't think Chris pulling a gun and pointing a gun at them and telling them to go away is necessarily any growth for his character in the movie.
Right.
So I can see why they would make that change. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I said I was maybe going to clear up the thing about shifting the focus to Gordy.
Yes.
And I think that clears it up.
Yes, I think it does a little bit. So you would say it's more focused on Chris, or maybe not even more focused on Chris.
But he gets the big emotional kind of moment
Right.
at the end, whereas in the movie it changes to Gordy.
So that's what he means when he said,
Yeah.
potentially what Rob Reiner means when he said he wanted to shift the focus to Gordy. It's still, the focus is on both of them, but Gordy gets the big climactic standing up to the bullies moment because it's more important to his character in our narrative in the movie than it would be for Chris. Cool. That makes sense.
A couple small things. The whole conversation that they have over the campfire is maybe one of the most amusing parts of the movie.
Oh, the back and forth where
Yeah.
they're just like bullshitting and
where they're just talking about random stuff.
When he says the line of, we spent the night talking about things that seemed important before you liked girls, or like before you found out about girls, or whatever the line is, something along those lines.
And they're like talking about what Goofy is, and Cherry Pez, and just a bunch of stupid
dumb
kid
stuff that every kid remembers talking about at sleepovers and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a good scene. And that's not in the book.
No.
Cool.
And another thing, so I mentioned that the pie eating contest story, the way they set that up is Stephen King kind of sticks it in the middle.
Yeah.
And there's a font change.
Yeah.
Love a good font change. And it's set up as though this is a story that he published as an adult in a literary magazine. There's one other story in the book that is set up similarly.
Yeah.
It's not in the movie, and I'm so glad that it's not.
Okay.
Because it's boring.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't
add anything.
It doesn't add anything.
Well, what is it?
It's like this weird, like, melodramatic story about this guy named Chico, and he has sex with this girl, and then he comes home and his parents kick him out, and it's supposed to be about like the thing that we're supposed to get out of it, because Gordy tells us this after the story's over, which A+ writing there, Mr. King.
Here's the point of that you just read.
So what we're supposed to get out of it is that it's about him, like, being angry about his brother's death or something. Because the character in the story also has a dead brother.
Okay.
And I was just like, I was reading it, and I was like, it was so long.
Yeah.
And I was like, do I have to read all of this? Like, what am I...
You don't,
so then
you don't need to.
I skimmed it, and I flipped to the end, and I was like, oh, there's the explanation of what I needed to get out of that. Cool, thanks.
So if you ever read The Body by Stephen King, and you get to the part about Chico...
Just skip it.
You can
skip
to the end and then read the line where Gordy says, and here's why that matters.
And the other thing that I loved about that is that I said it wasn't very good. It's not. And then after it's over, he's like, adult Gordy's, like, narration is like, oh, it just smacks of writing student in a workshop. It's so terrible. And I was like, why did you include this? You're couching it so hard.
Yeah. I guess his idea, and it's funny, I guess my only defense potentially would be, and it's not really a defense, that'd be maybe he put it in with that sort of couching at the end for writers, and obviously you didn't enjoy it, but for writers in the sense of sort of almost an in-joke for writers about how, we've all been there when you're a writing student writing something truly terrible, but
no, yeah, I mean, I go back and read the stuff I wrote as an undergrad, and I'm like, this is so cringeworthy. But it was so long.
Yeah, see that
and it didn't add anything. Like, it's a lot for an in-joke.
Right, yeah.
Especially since after it was over, he explained the in-joke, and then explained what he wanted us to get out of it.
It always makes jokes better when you just triple explain them.
Just explaining the joke is an A+ way to make a joke. So that was all I had for better in the movie.
All right, and I don't have anything else in sort of general notes. I have a little bit more we can discuss.
I have some general notes because there were some differences that I didn't really know where to place.
Okay.
So the cut scenes showing what the bullies are doing.
Oh, yeah, in the movie.
Yeah. That's not a thing in the book.
Okay.
Which makes sense because it's all from Gordy's perspective,
right.
so he
wouldn't
know what they're doing. And even as an adult...
Even in the film, that doesn't really make sense because we're
yeah.
still getting it in...
Right, and there is...
sort of omniscient there.
There is one little line closer to the end of the novella where we get, right, his narration, and he's like, we didn't know it at the time, but they were on their way driving out to come get the body.
Oh, like when they're
yeah.
getting close to finding it or something?
Yeah.
He says, like, oh, at the time...
Yeah, at the time we didn't know, but
yeah.
they were speeding down X road on their way to...
Which that makes sense because he would know that.
Right,
because
he would know that.
They got there eventually.
He would know that as an adult.
Yeah.
But, like, he wouldn't know that they were, like... knocking over the mailboxes and giving each other
that sort of stuff he would have no
weird
idea.
Scarification.
Yeah. Cobra tattoo scar things.
So that's something that I was torn on because I think from a narrative perspective, I mean, well, not from the point of view perspective, but from a narrative perspective, it makes sense for us, the audience, to be able to see what's going on with them. Otherwise, they would just like show up.
Yeah. We need a little bit from them and just to get to know them a little bit. And it's very little in the film, but it's like 2 or 3 scenes.
But I do think it kind of disrupts the main storyline.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I also don't. To me, it didn't seem distracting. It's such a tidy movie as it is.
It's true.
That way, it's not like we're wasting a lot of time with them or anything like that. And it literally is like 2 scenes, I think. It's the one where they're knocking over mailboxes.
There's the mailboxes.
Maybe 3. They're the one where they're doing the scars.
There's the one where they play chicken with that truck.
Yeah.
And the truck runs off the road, which, holy fuck, how much trouble would you get in?
This is the 60s or 50s or whatever. Nobody got in trouble for anything.
Still, like...
You could just do whatever you wanted.
That guy in the truck would have lived to go, like, report them to the police, I assume.
Yeah, but it was just hijinks. That's just what you did back then. It didn't matter.
Hijinks.
Don't even get me started on...
That was very destructive.
Don't even get me started on the... This would go on a whole different rant about...
What, kids these days?
Yeah, about adults who did stuff like that and saw it as sort of classic when I was a kid, he was running around drinking and driving and knocking over mailboxes and blowing up, throwing firecrackers in mailboxes, and it was just what we did. It was all harmless hijinks, but then as soon as any kid does anything, especially if they happen to be a kid who doesn't happen to be white, oh boy, it is not so classically harmless hijinks anymore. Right. And that's a whole thing I have an issue with. But
it's a nice story there, Frank, but it was still wrong of you to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, that's a whole nother bag of worms.
So that was a thing that, for me.
Right.
And it makes more sense in a movie than it would in the book, so fair enough. So the gun. I think the movie does a better job of setting up, reminding, and paying off the gun.
Yeah.
Because in the book, they don't keep watch with it.
Yeah, it makes sense, too.
Yeah, there's the setup when he has Gordy shoot it in the alley.
Yeah.
And then there's the payoff at the very end.
Right.
So I think the movie does a better job of that 3-act...
the normal, what we talked about
3-act kind
before.
of structure. But on the other hand...
Set up, reminder, payoff. Not 3-act structure, but yeah.
Set up, reminder, payoff.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is a literal Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
So I also kind of like the format where we essentially forget about it until the very end.
Which, to be fair, even still, I think the way the movie handles it, you still, even with the reminder, you still kind of forget about it in the moment. Like, I have seen this movie before, and I vaguely remembered how it ended, but it's been a long time, and I still was surprised in the moment when he pulls the gun out. Not like wildly surprised, but was like, oh shit, that's right. They have a gun. Like,
Yeah.
I literally, that was my thought. Like, oh, that's right. Like, I forgot about it. Even though, yeah, they set it up and they reminded us, like, and I had it in my notes and everything, but I still kind of in that moment forgot that he was going to pull a gun on him. Like,
No, and I mean, that's why it's something that I'm torn on, because I think it works both ways, and both ways are good.
yeah.
And a Chekhov's gun, for anyone who might not know,
Go ahead and explain that.
it's a dramatic principle stating that everything in your story should be essential.
Yes. If you show a gun,
If
in
you
the
show
first
a gun
act,
in the first act, it has to go off
in the third act.
by the third act. So it is a literal Chekhov's gun.
Yes.
And we get this from Anton Chekhov, who was a playwright. And there are several quotes from him where he extols the virtues of this dramatic principle using the exact same gun metaphor.
Yeah.
Like, you can look it up. He's several different letters he talks about this.
Yeah. But it's also been extrapolated to some extent, and maybe this isn't the correct usage of it, but that is the sort of traditional interpretation, or not interpretation, his sort of traditional meaning is that if you see a gun, everything in your play, in your story should be important. We shouldn't see anything out of place that doesn't come back.
Right.
But also there's sort of not a twist on it, but that and this is something that Hitchcock did a lot of, is showing the audience that thing in order to build the tension to the moment when it does go off.
Right.
So obviously, and there's similar ideas. They're just slightly different. Like the classic Hitchcock, or at least what I was taught in film, I assume it was Hitchcock. I think that's what I remember. Is that when you edit a scene and then you show two people talking at a table, and then you cut to under the table and there's a bomb with a timer. Mm-hmm. And then you go back up to above the table, and then the conversation continues. Now that's within one scene, because I obviously not going to play it over the course of a whole 3-act movie. But the idea is similar, is that now you've created that tension by showing us the bomb, then now we're constantly waiting for that to pay off. It's sort of an extension of Chekhov's gun, where you showed us the gun in the first act. That better mean something because it's creating tension.
Yeah.
That is building to a final moment. And so it's sort of both of those things. One, it better pay off, because why would you show it to us otherwise? But two, it better pay off because it is now creating tension in the audience to that final
Unless it's a red herring.
Unless it's a red herring, which is its own thing, or because then you're subverting.
Then you're subverting Chekhov's gun, flipping it around.
Which you can also do. And
whole lot of stuff you can do.
Yeah, all kinds of things you can do. But yeah, so that's Chekhov's gun. Anyways, that was fun. What anything else?
I wanted to talk about the tone of the book versus the tone of the movie.
Okay.
So I don't know if you got this, but I thought that the book and the movie had a similar kind of nostalgic gloom.
Let me try to interpret what you mean by that. If I had to guess, your idea would... the last line of the film is, I never had any friends like I did when I was 11. Mm-hmm. Or whatever. Do any of us?
Yeah.
My interpretation of nostalgic gloom based on that would be the idea that nostalgic for the past because that was the only good times. Potentially? Or no? Is that not the way you were going with? Like, not the only good times, but that was the peak of your life. Sort of nostalgic, but...
gloomy.
But gloomy because that was the peak. Or that was the best. Is that not what you were going for?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Like, an element of that, but also, like, this element of... kind of the opposite of, like, rose-colored glasses, where you're, like, seeing it and you're like, yeah, that was the best, but you also, like, feel upset about it.
I'm not sure I got that from the film. What do you mean?
Okay, let me backpedal on that. You're reminiscing about the past, right? And there's that nostalgia factor, and... you do think that it was kind of the best of times, but within the narrative tone, there's this like a layer of like kind of inner rot.
I think I can see that. Yeah, I think I can get what you're saying there.
Where it's not necessarily coming from the narrator, but it's coming from like the way that things are presented.
Yes.
Yes, we're kind of looking back on the past with this nostalgic feel of like, oh, it was the best of times.
Right.
But also, if you think about the characters in this movie, aside from those four main boys, everyone is awful.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is just the worst.
That we run into, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we run into very few people, but yes. I mean, his parents are not great.
Mm-hmm. All the bullies, the guy at the store,
the junkyard,
the guy at the junkyard. With the way they talk about their teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. All of their parents, pretty much, at least as far as we
So
know.
that's what I mean when I'm saying this kind of nostalgic gloom where the person who's looking back on it is reminiscing, but they're not like actively acknowledging this kind of, like I said, this kind of inner rot, but it's still present.
Yes, I think the thing that's most interesting about it is that yes, he's reminiscing and he's reminiscing so much and so nostalgic for his friendships that he had at that time, and it almost is rose-colored glasses things because we see it's very obvious to all of us how terrible all of the people that they like, all of their parents and all of everybody they interacted with were all kind of awful, and this was not a great situation generally.
Yeah.
But he still doesn't see it. Like, he still doesn't remember it that way.
Yeah.
Because he's remembering explicitly their relationships and their moments together.
Right.
And sort of, yeah.
Nostalgic gloom.
There you go. Well, we got there in the end.
So the book and the movie both have that. I think the book kind of cranks it up a little. The book is interesting because it almost feels like a ghost story. Like the ghost of his childhood.
Right. Yeah.
Is what we're getting the story of. The book has more of a sense of like generational malaise.
Yeah.
Where he's like kind of constantly talking about, oh, that's not there anymore. Now it's a shopping center or that kind of thing.
Yep.
And I think the movie achieves this to a degree, but the book could almost be like a Southern Gothic. Like, we could almost put it into that genre. Which Southern Gothic takes that idea of nostalgic gloom and like inner rot, just like cranks it up to 11.
Right. It's
all about like, wasn't the plantation so great? But in the meantime, the plantation is crumbling around everyone.
Yeah. It is. I think it is actually more evident in the film than initially when you first watch it. And because you're so focused on their relationships and sort of their dynamic, I think it's not as obvious.
Yeah. Like
kind of the first time you watch the movie, but I can definitely see it thinking back on it more now. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, you see that, like I said, not through the main narration, but through everything else that's happening, where it's more obvious to the viewer or to the reader than it is to the characters.
All right, well, let's hit the final verdict. That's what it's called.
No, I think of that every time you say the final verdict.
I do too.
Every time.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
Katie, is the film Stand By Me or the novella The Body better?
I'm going to give it to the movie.
Oh.
We've had a string of movies.
Yep.
But
one of those wasn't fair. It was Ready Player One. It was always going to be better than the book, but
I think the novella was good. And it's worth your time, especially if you're a big fan of the movie.
Yeah. And probably if you're just a big Stephen King fan. Which, if you're a big Stephen King fan,
you've probably already read it.
So.
But if you like the movie a lot, I would say that this is worth your time. If you like nostalgic stories about boyhood in the 50s and 60s, you'll probably like this story. And it's short. It's a novella, so it's under 150 pages. It's a quick read. I read it in like the span of 3 days. Mm-hmm. But I think that the movie tells a tighter story, and I think it tells a more emotionally meaningful story.
Yep, the changes to Gordy and Denny's relationship, and then giving Gordy the climactic sort of emotional triumph at the end.
It's a more satisfying denouement.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Look up that French word. It's your homework if you don't know what it means. Katie, what's next?
We will be tackling one of my favorite books and movies, featuring a character that I have long heavily identified with. Roald Dahl's Matilda.
Yes. Excited. I don't think I've seen it in 10 years, probably.
Awesome.
Maybe.
I'm excited.
It's been a long time. But yeah, I'm excited to watch it again. So Matilda is the next one. It's a pretty short book, right?
Yeah, it's a children's
book. So yeah, you go check out Matilda. The movie is a classic. Mm-hmm. So go check that out. And what's her name's a badass these days?
Mara Wilson.
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's her name.
Mara. Yeah, I don't know how you pronounce it, but Mara Wilson's a badass on Twitter. Matilda, next episode. Until then, do us a favor. Go find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you listen to us. Give us a review. Give us a rating. It helps us out a lot. You can also find us on all of the social medias. Just search This Film Is Lit. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and the subreddit r/This Film Is Lit. That's it. That's all the stuff. Right?
Yes.
Cool. Until next time, keep reading books, keep watching movies, keep being awesome.